Alright, guys, we are on part 2. I am back. I have my internet and computer all working. Alrighty, so moving on to the brain. So the brain is going to be part of the central nervous system. And so when you take out a chunk of the brain to destroy it and then to study human behavior and animal behavior, that is called a lesion. Okay, then we have an EEG. We are normally going to use an EEG for any type of sleep waves. It's how we figured out that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 4, 3, 2, 1 REM. And so it's going to be these electrodes that are attached to your head. It's pretty non-invasive. Anyone can get one if needed. And so this one tends to be able to measure brain waves. All right, then we have a PET scan. Anytime we see the word PET scan, we want to think of the word glucose. So this is pretty much where we will inject glucose into you as you are doing a certain task, and then your brain will light up with the glucose, and so that way we'll know what parts of your brain is functioning when you're doing certain tasks like math or reading or looking at pictures. All right, then we have an MRI. This is going to be a magnetic. This is pretty much where you're going to be able to produce a pretty good generated image of your brain. And we talked about this little butterfly thing. This was more for someone with schizophrenia. So this is a fluid-filled part of your brain. If someone has schizophrenia, where someone that doesn't have it as fluid filled. So there's an enlargement in that part of our brain that deals with schizophrenia. So an MRI would be able to give you that image. Okay, now moving on to brain structures. So the brain part that deals with information processing center, it's a huge part of your brain. If you cut it open, it looks like the spaghetti part. So this part is called the cerebral cortex. So it's kind of like the wrinkly part of your brain. Okay, then the oldest part of our brain structure, which deals with automatic survival functions, is going to be the brain stem. And then within the brain stem, we have different parts. So the first part is right here. It deals with heartbeat and breathing, which is the medulla. Then we have this part right here that deals with arousal, which is the reticular formation. And so in the book, it talked about this cat where if I was to go in and stimulate this part of the cat and their reticular formation, then they would go rare and they get really aroused. But if you do the opposite, if you were to lesion out and remove this part of the brain, then the cat would then fall into a coma. So the reticular formation deals with arousal. Okay. Then we have the sensory switchboard, which is going to be the top of the brainstem, which is the thalamus, which is up here. And so it's going to deal with all of your sensations except for which one? So it deals with no smell, but it does have sight, touch, taste. What's the other one? Oh, hearing. But the only one that it will not deal with is a sense of smell. So what deals with sense of smell is going to be the olfactory bulbs, which is going to be not part of the thalamus. Okay, then we have this one. Remember, we have David Beckham. And so he has really good motor movements, really coordinated. So this is going to be called the cerebellum. And the way we remember that is the two L's look like the legs. So then legs help you have balance and coordination. And it looks like a little tennis ball in the back of your head. Okay, then we have the emotion part of your brain, which is going to be your limbic system. A quick review. So limbic system in general deals with emotions. That's like the main function. And then within the limbic system, we have 3 other parts. So our acronym for that was going to be, let's see. So we have the amygdala, the hypothalamus, and the hippocampus. Okay. So the limbic system looks kind of like a donut. And again, it's going to have It's going to have hippocampus, amygdala, and hypothalamus. So this whole part of your brain, limbic system in general deals with emotions. Anytime you feel fear, aggression, and sexual feelings, a lot of that part is going to be because of the limbic system because it has these 3 parts within it. So breaking down those 3 parts. Okay, this one deals with fear and anger because Amy is always fearful and angry. Or you can say Amy is always afraid and angry. So then you also have your A's. Okay. All right, then this part of our brain, this is our pleasure reward center. This helps us have body temperature, emotions, hunger, thirst, circadian rhythms. So the hypothalamus is our reward center because when we feel pleasure, we want to be in good temp. We don't be too cold, we don't be too warm. So then we just feel good. So that's pleasurable. Emotions, ideally, we like to feel pleasant emotions like happiness, joy. Hunger, once you eat, you feel very satisfied. So that's pleasurable. When you drink something, when you're really thirsty, that's pleasurable. And then circadian rhythms deals with sleep. So when you guys sleep enough, you feel pleasurable or pleasant. And so all of this part is going to be your hypothalamus, which deals with your reward pleasure center. Again, eating, drinking, temperature, emotions. It also helps when you have sex and fornication. And so pretty much it is going to bring you those pleasurable feelings. And then again, hypothalamus is going to be the master of the master gland, which is the pituitary gland. And then remember this little rat, it kept running back and forth because it would stimulate this part of the brain. So the rat would go through this electrical panel and then it would stimulate the hypothalamus, which then would bring the rat pleasure. So then at some point the rat kept running back and forth and then it died of pleasure. So if you're going to have to die, you might as well die feeling good, I guess. Okay, then we have the hippo. The hippo never loses itself on campus because it is the hippocampus and it has a good memory and good learning abilities. So the hippo remembered his way around campus, memory, and learning. So all three of those parts, hippocampus, hypothalamus, amygdala, is part of the limbic system, which looks like a donut, and the limbic system controls our emotions. All right, again, cerebral cortex, read this slide. I don't know why it's in here again, but it deals with our information processing center because we're always processing information. All right, and then we have all our lobes. Do we remember all the hand and head gestures? Okay, so our lobes, we have the frontal lobe, we have the parietal lobe, we have the occipital lobe, we have the temporal lobe. Okay, so just kind of going through the different, oopsie, my goodness, the different parts. Okay, so frontal lobe is up here. Remember, parietal lobe is like, ooh, I like to have my hair touched. Temporal lobe is earmuffs, and then occipital lobe is in the back of our head, so kind of like our eyes in the back of our heads. Okay, so the frontal lobe, again, is going to be in the front. So this deals with reasoning, planning, emotions, problem solving, impulse control. It doesn't fully develop until the age of 25. And so one way to remember this is the fact that when you guys are studying for a test or when you're taking a test, a lot of you guys will do this. If it's a really hard test, you're like, oh my gosh. So this is you guys pretty much reasoning and planning out your answers. It's also why a lot of times as adolescents, you guys might be a little bit more impulsive and you might say and do things that you didn't really mean because your ability to problem solve and to have impulse control isn't fully developed. So that's not going to happen until you're about 25. Okay, the parietal lobe is going to be up here. It's the whole like, oh, do you like head massages? Do you like people playing with your hair or brushing with your hair? But words. Brushing your hair. And if you do, it's because it deals with touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. Same thing if you stub your toe, your parietal lobe is going to fire. Temperature, if you ever wear hats or beanies, it actually makes the rest of your body feel warm. And so our brain and our head up here controls a lot of our temperature for the rest of our body. Okay, the temporal lobe is going to be earmuffs because it's going to be auditory and it also helps with memory. And so that's why a lot of times if you guys hear a song, it might throw you back to a certain time period. So like certain songs like 90s hip hop for me reminds me of high school, like early high school, 8th grade. Certain songs like, Boys to Men or Tupac or, Britney Spears or whatever will throw you back to a certain memory. And so because our auditory and our memory part of our brain are really close together. Okay, and then we have occipital, which is the back of the brain, which deals with vision. It's why we have that whole saying of I have eyes in the back of my head, I'm always watching you, because that part of our brain that controls vision is back there. Alrighty, then we have our cortex. We have motor and sensory cortex. So you want to remember looking at the brain, which one comes first, like which one's in front of the other. And so you're going to have the motor cortex be first. like closer to the frontal lobe, and then the sensory cortex is going to be behind it. It's going to be second. And the way you can remember that is the sensory cortex is really close to the parietal lobe, which deals with sensations, temperature, pain. So hopefully that's one way to remember. Or you can think of M comes before S in the alphabet, so motor is in the front and the sensory is right behind it. All right, then we have association areas. So more intelligent animals have increased uncommitted association areas. So if you look at the slide, we as humans, we have just larger chunks of association areas, which basically then makes us the more intelligent species. All right, then we have language. So an impairment of language, the general term for that is going to be aphasia. And then the part that deals with speaking is going to be braca, because it looks like the word boca in Spanish, so mouth. And then Wernicke's area is going to deal with understanding. So Braca's area in general deals with speaking, but if you have an impairment to Braca, then you're going to have Braca's aphasia, which basically means I can understand everything that you say to me, but I cannot produce words effectively. Okay, Wernicke's area deals with understanding and comprehension of in-words information, but if I have damage to my Wernicke's area, then I'm going to have Wernicke's aphasia, which then means I'm going to have a hard time understanding information coming in, but my speech can actually be very clear, even though it might be more of like a word salad, but at least the words are spoken very clearly. Like I could say dog, tomorrow, pizza, green. Like all those words are spoken clearly. They just might be very jumbled. So most people believe that Braca's aphasia is probably better if you had to have one, because even though I can't speak properly, I can at least understand all the words that are coming in. Okay, and then plasticity is pretty much the brain's ability to modify itself after some type of injury. So our brains are really amazing. So if you get damage to one part of your brain, ideally other parts of your brain are going to pick up its functions. It may not be perfect, but our brain wants to kind of work itself together, and then it's going to modify itself to then be able to like re-heal itself. Okay, and then we have our divided brain. We have left and right hemisphere. So left is going to be considered the dominant brain, at least it used to be, because most people are right-handed. And so when you're talking about the difference between left and right hemisphere, left is going to deal with all your L words. So it's going to be language, linguistics, and logic. So language, linguistic, logic is going to be more of a left brain type of functioning, whereas the right brain is going to be more visuals, more creativity, more emotions, and more artistic abilities. Okay, so then when you split your brain in half, we are essentially cutting the corpus callosum. Okay. Remember, we had the split brain patients, and so when you're looking at this, okay, so remember, the left hemisphere is the one that can actually speak, whereas the the right hemisphere, it can do the pointing. And so if we were to ask a split brain person, what do you see? The left is going to see the opposite. So then they're going to be able to speak, I see art. But then the right hemisphere is going to see the opposite of that, which is going to be he. And so when you ask them to point to it, then they're going to be able to say he. Okay, so if you Google, split brain experiments, then that will help you remember what that experiment was about. Remember, we also hooked arms with each other in class, and only the left side of the brain could talk, whereas the right side could then point. And remember, each hemisphere does the opposite of our bodies. So when it comes to visual fields and our actual bodies, it's going to look at the opposite. Okay, remember this guy, his name is HM. He's the one that first did it. The person that did split brain, remember the researcher's name was going to be Gonzaga and Sperry, which is 40 Studies number 1. Okay, so then again, going over a review of what the split brain's functions are. Again, the right side is going to be about perceptions. It's going to be visual. It's going to be emotions. It's going to be creative. It's going to be art. So just think about all your like artists that are, maybe angsty or artistically gifted, and they're gonna have a lot of emotions behind their art. Same thing with musicians; they're very artistic and creative, and a lot of emotions. Whereas your left brain people are going to be very linguistic and also very logical, and very step by step. Alrighty, guys. Hopefully that was a decent review for you. Remember, know your brain parts. Also, really know your neurotransmitters. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.